very warm welcome to our panelists, Mr. Sudarshan Suchi and Mr. Hitendra Singh, and all the participants who are joining this webinar. Today we
रत्ना
are
मैम,
yeah.
अभी मैंने ब्रॉडकास्ट स्टार्ट नहीं किया है। मैं सुदर्शन सर को कह रहा था अनम्यूट कर लीजिए सर माइक।
ओके।
और अभी मैं जैसे ही ओके
जी आप स्टार्ट करें तो बता दीजिए प्लीज।
हाँ, बस मैं ब्रॉडकास्ट स्टार्ट कर रहा हूँ।
हाँ जी, आई एम अनम्यूटेड।
यस मैम, स्टार्टेड।
Okay, a very warm welcome to our panelists today, Mr. Sudarshan Suchi and Mr. Hitendra Singh, and all the participants who are joining this webinar today. Today we are going to discuss a very special issue related to women and children, caring women and children in post-COVID situation. We'll be discussing what kind of policy responses are there and what kind of recovery plan could be there for development of women and children in this situation, and also what kind of career opportunities available with the young population to work more effectively for this segment. What we have been observing these days, most of the young people, young generations are coming forward to mitigate the effect of COVID-19 or on society, particularly women and children. They are taking up challenges and want to work for that segment, not as direct charity, but also as career options for them to work in their life. So before I introduce our panelists, I just want to highlight why women and children, why we need to talk about women and children when we deal with the COVID-19 situation and we talk about the recovery plans. As we all know that COVID-19 pandemic has been severely affecting human beings worldwide, and almost all the countries have been finding out solutions to mitigate the effect and to fight COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has not only caused direct impact on the human health, but it has a very severe and serious socio-economic impact on women and children, especially those belong to the marginalized section and the disadvantaged section of the society. It is very crucial to take into account, I think, women and children when we talk about response and recovery of COVID. Why I'm calling it a special segment, because it holds a very, very special place in the Constitution of India, and also national and international commitment, sustainable development goals, our legislations and policies in the country. As we all know that 40% of the population of our country is children, and more than 48% women constitute almost more than 48% of the population. So despite of the large population of women and children, in India, women and children face multiple vulnerabilities. So, because of this reason, women and children, holds a special place when in a development sector, whether it is livelihood, education, health, government initiatives, policies, or programs. They hold very vital space in terms of development policies. And if we talk about indicators like health, education, and other basic services, access to basic services, women and children are those having very less access to education. Marginalized women have very less access to education, healthcare. We can see that more than 50% of our population, women population, are anemic. More than 59% of the child population is malnourished in our country. And very vulnerable situation is that we can see that large number of India has largest number of child laborers. More than 10 million children we have child laborers who are working in very hazardous situation, and they are vulnerable to the exploitation and sexual abuse. So likewise, there are several indicators which shows that women and children still need attention in terms of policy and recovery plans. So I would like to now introduce our panelist for today's discussion, Mr. Sudarshan Suchi. Mr. Suchi has more than 30 years of experience in conceptualizing scoping and articulation of development programs, policy planning, project executions, policy research. He had been associated with a lot of corporate organization companies. He was with the Society for Promotion of Wasteland Development, National Trees Growers Corporation Federation. He had worked with National Dairy Development Board for over a decade, and he was also associated. He has led CSR initiatives. He worked with Reliance Foundation for more than 13 years. So, and as far as his qualification is concerned, sir is master in participation power and social change from IDS Sussex University, UK. And currently, sir is associated with SOS Children Villages of India as a Secretary General. SOS Children Villages is an organization which works for the holistic development of marginalized children and women. Sir, we are very fortunate to have you to discuss issues related to children in this seminar. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks.
We also have our second panelist, Mr. Hitendra Singh. Mr. Hitendra Singh is a rural development practitioner and a leader and has more than 22 years of experience of working with several government organizations, civil society organizations in India. He worked with Pradhan, PIDO, Aravali, Tata Trust, Center for Microfinance, and several other CSOs in different states. So he has been playing a very crucial role in advocacy and in terms of empowering rural community and particularly women livelihoods, improving women livelihoods. And he is currently associated with the biggest poverty eradication mission of the country in Jharkhand. Jharkhand State Livelihood Promotion Society has been associated as head human resource development and social development. So we welcome you, sir, for this important issue to discuss women-related issue. Thank you so much once again. Warm welcome, sir. We would like to start with Sudarshan, sir. So, sir, over to you.
Okay, I think first of all, thank you IIHMR, Dr. Ratna, to kind of provide this platform for engagement between myself, Hitendra, and all the other participants. I think there are certainly two people who will come out wiser out of all this. That's myself and Hitendra. I just hope that we are able to be of some use to all others also. And we have learned the hard way with all these years that, listening to learn is one of the biggest skills to be developed over and above other things. So forever, we're trying to listen to learn as to what all things are coming from who and how. But coming back to your topic, the context of your topic. So I think if we look at COVID is only repeating what any disasters anywhere, bring forward. So disasters and people impacted or affected by disasters are people who are most vulnerable. And people who are vulnerable, actually, they are like disasters waiting to happen. So it's like it's one disaster or the other. Which one would it be is more the question. So if it was not COVID, it could be excessive heat, it could be excessive cold, it could be rain, it could be malnutrition, it could be whatever. So as a society, between power and powerless in a broad way, between the rich and poor in the resources in the other way. So the most vulnerable are vulnerable to, so the disaster by itself is, it's like a misnomer. We say cloud burst was the disaster, earthquake was the disaster. So quite sometimes you'll say that everybody and anybody got impacted. But what we're talking about, the maximum impact and the damage and the inability to recover from damage, who it is, it's the extreme poor and the people in fragile conditions or vulnerable. Now, in the context of today's discussion and the context, I feel that as a society, children and women in a larger context are the most vulnerable and susceptible to disasters because they already are in a vulnerable condition. So especially if you take children and women who are, in the extreme marginal conditions. By marginal, I mean marginal in terms of livelihood and in terms of their earning capacity. They are the most fragile, and their ability to not just withstand the disaster, but in the long run to recover from it is it's I mean it's not there. So that's where our role becomes very important in the context. When I say our role, the the people who claim a livelihood for in the name of development, that how do you make communities, societies, and the vulnerable people resilient to such disasters? How do you capacitate? What do we do? Those are the kind of things that can make a huge impact or difference, which means that you don't do disaster relief the day after the disaster. I mean, that can be a very short term immediate agenda. It's what you do in the long term, how you really build those capacities to listen. Those things matter. So your choices of development, intervention, design of them, the processes of them is all about building those capacities. Dr. Ratna, I'm not sure if I've stirred way off the topic, but I just wanted to build a very broad perspective.
So it's very relevant point, sir, very relevant point.
So because the context of your larger context of how does a development professional engage or what do they do, it doesn't begin and end with the current context. It's about that part of the community which is fragile and vulnerable. How do you engage with them? What do you do? How do you decide what is right or wrong to do? It emanates from this understanding of their vulnerability, and do we want them to become resilient and self-reliant? And if so, the choices we make a huge difference. And that's where, or even whether we make the choices or who makes the choices, and how do we explore our role? How do we enhance their basket of choices? That's where the mindset makes a huge difference, which I think most of your listener audience today, participants, would probably connect with participatory processes. That how do we make them happen? How do we honor and live those processes? So thank you. Thanks for the time. I'll rest there.
So can I ask a question, because you have pointed out a very important issue that the disaster always affect a very fragile and vulnerable community first. So, and you told that there is need to understand and making them choices, means giving them choices and making them self-reliant is very, very important. So what do you think, what kind of opportunities and scope is there for people to join such kind of to work for such kind of goals? So what kind of scope and opportunities are available?
Yeah, so I'll be very candid on this. Scope and opportunity can be interpreted two ways. One is, what is in it for me? Mera kya hoga ya mujhko kya milega? And the second is, what can I do for this? So just to borrow a very famous quote of Kennedy, who mentioned that, ask not what my country can do for me, but ask what I can do for the country. So I would paraphrase it in this context that the scope and the potential is infinite. Ideally, I would wish that from IITs, IIMs, or any profession, the best of the brain. See, look at the larger design of our society. So the best of the brains are required to solve the most critical of problems. But then where there are most critical of problems is the affordability minimum to get those best brains. And by the way, whoever is best brain, I'm not saying that only IIT, IIMs are the best brain. I'm saying quality of engagement. So what, because when you say scope and potential, I think anybody who can engage in understanding the pain processes and applying all our education in terms of a lateral thinking capacity. So the education is not about what one read in page 4 or page 9. Education is about how to access knowledge from a single point. How do you access knowledge from the whole globe? Do such problems exist anywhere else? Can I borrow them? What are the processes through which those problems are solved? Can we offer them in the place we engage? And parallelly, what is the expectation I should have in terms of engaging in this? So there, I think the potential is huge. The scope is huge. Until all these problems last and the larger community is marginalized, there is a huge potential to engage. But I think there has to be a sense of mission or a missionary zeal. And quite sometimes, sadly, I would say, if a person puts himself or herself ahead of the people whom they serve, I think we tend to lose the plot there. So if the listeners today, among them, you have a majority of the student community, I would say give first 3 to 5 years to most difficult roles and tasks and places who can't afford you. Go there and help and figure out before getting to comfort zones. Yeah.
So, would request you to kindly, share about your experiences too, because you have said that initial 3-4 years are very crucial to work.
Yes.
Work with the community. Could you please share your own experiences, because you yourself led so many programs and policies as a
Yes.
leader, and you are now leading a child rights organization. So, could you please highlight that?
So I think, I am just afraid whether your other rest of the participants will get restless on hearing monotony just from me. But since you asked very briefly, my journey started with a tea plantation, which was a highly as corporate and big as it can get. I found out in 1 year that's not where I want to be. Came to SPWD development sector and was to work in Garhwal and Kumaon. I had nothing to offer. I just immersed myself in learning and not feeling stupid in asking any question and wanting to learn anything, from how to plant a tree to how to plow. I was not a farmer's son. How to plow land, or how to communicate, or how to listen into people to find different realities within a small village. So, for example, if I read that small communities are homogeneous communities, everybody is united, everything is fine, I learned the hard way that even a small community has infinite fissures within once you start to get to see and know. So, my first 3-4 years were singularly focused on learning by doing, learning by listening, and learning by not hesitating to ask how, ask why not, and use my skills of observation. And they were years focused on not what I will get out of the system by way of income, privileges, anything. They were focused on how I can build my skill and competency to be useful to communities. There was one mantra which I learned early, is that there is a sometimes you can go with a very condescending attitude that you know it all and you are available to solve problems and they are just waiting there for you. Nobody else locally could solve. It's the furthest from truth. I think there are situations, circumstances, but there is abundance of knowledge even locally available. There are a lot of constraints. So I think it does good to be a little humble while engaging and grounding yourself in engaging with communities, because that's when you start receiving capacities. And I think I learned a lot. So my journey to working for a childcare organization has been a long road. And ironically, today I feel like the same person who started the journey 30 years ago. I know that I don't know more things than the things I know, and which allows me to learn incidentally. So I'm open to acquiring those skills and learning.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks.
Coming to Hitendra, sir, so we would like to know from you what kind of skills rural development managers associated with SRLM or other government policies and programs related to women, what kind of skills is required for them, and as you know that the disease burden and out of pocket expenditure on the times of ill health are very high in India. So under NRLM, this has been a significant agenda to address this issue through the women self-help groups in rural India. So what do you think how these community-based organizations have been dealing with the situation, will be dealing with the situation, and how professional could join this mission, as already lots of young professionals have been working with SRLMs in different states. So what kind of skills they require to for the to work post COVID situation with these community based organizations?
Thank you very much, Ratna, and thank you also to IIHMR for giving me such platform to express my views also. I'll start with some points which I have actually made up in my mind while starting this discussion. See, it is rightly said by Sudarshan, the disaster and the disaster preparedness is very unique, particularly in the situation of COVID. But actually, I have been actually working in implementation field, and I have many positive things to actually share. And I would like this forum to actually use to spread the positivity, whatever we have experienced in our implementation. See, what we have experienced, the entire this COVID pandemic or whatever the situation we are having right now, that has actually that has actually brought us an opportunity to do certain innovation, and that innovation is very, it should be very much it should be very practical, and it should be benefiting to the community for whom actually we are working. And we have done it to many extent. We have done it, and that is very much related to the kind of opportunities that is available right now in the rural development professionals. I'll give you certain examples also. But we have also experienced the whole corona fight actually has been actually fought with a very sense of positivity. Our frontline worker, largely those who are actually working at the field level, they all are women, and their positivity actually has actually helped us to actually design certain innovations. I'll give you some example also. But second, my point is that in whole situation, we have been able to actually identify or segregate two things: what is essential and what is non-essential for us. And that has also actually given us an idea how to actually go ahead. And having all these things as our mantra, we have started working through our self-help group, and they have shown a tremendous opportunities what actually there with us, which we can actually utilize to serve those who are actually needy. I am just giving you one example. What has happened when this pandemic started? The biggest problem what we actually faced in Jharkhand rural areas, that was the food, providing food to those who are unable to actually go out from home and who don't have any kind of food surplus or even food stock at their home. And mostly, who are who are these people? They are those who are actually residing in village without any kind of support.
We can't hear you, Hitendra ji. There is some problem with connectivity.
Yeah.
Hello, Hitendra ji.
मैम उनका शायद नेट डिस्कनेक्ट हुआ है.
Okay. No issues. Sir, I recently had a discussion with our alumni, and most of our students, alumni who have been working with childcare institutions, child resource center, who have been engaged with capacity building and training of childcare institutions, professionals. So they always share a great thing about, they said that rural management education is not for 2 years, it's a lifelong learning process. Because when they joined childcare institutions, they had a different kind of learning with them. So, and currently, if we see the situation of vulnerable children, particularly children who are there in childcare institutions, there are several challenges of managing these institutions, organizations, childcare NGOs who, so what kind of, new skills are there which are required for, to manage these organizations and institutions very effectively? So what is your message to the, to our young generation?
Sure. So I think what has become evident to us here at SOS which I think on most child care. And when I say child care, I am looking at a whole span from zero till the time a youth is settled into the larger community as a self-reliant citizen. So I think what has brought out is the need for holistic development of a child. We cannot rely purely now on English, maths, and science passing and 10th and 12th with good marks. To make a child capable of earning a livelihood, there are multiple options nowadays available. And I think one of the future roles, biggest roles and opportunities will be in developing capacities to bring these to the childcare institutions, various places. This is one element which I see in terms of vocational things. So I'm saying the earlier we start identifying it, the better the child will be able to enhance the capacity. It's something like what we see on TV and all. Those Indian Idol Junior, this junior, that junior. So then you find suddenly one day that same person whom you saw 15 years ago is today a famous singer earning millions in performing art. So I think they're all out there. Beautiful artists, writers, sportsmen, children. They don't know themselves that. How do you spot out those multiple opportunities for children very early? The earlier you spot out, the more you can build. So one is spotting out talent. Second is capacity to then nurture it and build it is a big opportunity. Second thing, I think, again, brought out by COVID situation and by disaster context that we are talking about today, and even otherwise, I think mental stability or psychological build-up, or in terms of, the basic character building, in terms of, having a confident, stable context and self-esteem, mentoring, so to say, or I don't know which are the words which would best fit in, but preparing the soft skills of children in assimilating into larger society, I think there's a huge potential there, because the vulnerability in terms of setbacks and mental contexts are also huge. And I'm not saying children who are with SOS, I'm saying children in general. Children exposure to vulnerabilities is much larger of all kinds of vulnerabilities. So child safeguarding, I think, is a very big context. Having said both these things, there's a third element, and I think that element is contribution, because you asked me from the context of your students and development professionals engagement. I think developing processes, systems approach to any initiative is a big opportunity, bringing systems in place, because people do want predictability and they want consistency. That can happen only with systems being in place.
Sir, a small question related, because you have said that in vocational trainings and capacity building, mental stability, and bringing system in place are very crucial
Yeah.
components when we talk about
Yeah.
child care institutions management. So, what do you think? How rural management education, play a very critical role in building capacity amongst young generations who wish to, work for them, women and children. So, what kind of opportunity rural management education could bring in for them?
So I think if rural management education is focused on participatory processes and grounded on bringing transformative change, meaning a change which lasts and a change which is internalized and owned by communities. I think the rural management professionals have a huge opportunity, because you have a choice when you ground yourself in a community. Do you in perpetuity make people captive to you in what you do and how you do, or can you unlock the potential of others? So I think if the rural management professionals are equipped with capacities and processes to unlock the potential of vulnerable people, let's say if you look at the basic statistics of India, I mean, urban, rural. So you have 70% India, which is rural, or we are talking about if there are 15 crore households or 20 crore households, or we are talking about 1.2 billion population, we're talking about a majority of it, 60-70%, which is vulnerable and fragile. And again, an equivalent percentage in rural communities, particularly in rural areas, or a much higher density in rural areas. And if we are talking about 6.5 lakh villages, and assuming an agenda of 6.5 lakh transformed villages, so that would mean, so we are talking about more than 500,000 of those villages. We we have a lifelong journey of people, and if we are talking about roughly 12 crore or 120 million households in these places to engage with in terms of the transformative journey. I think each of your development professional has a lifetime's journey in just one village. But if they can unlock these processes of stakeholder ownership and context, then India doesn't have to wait for another 50 years to be transformed rurally. It can happen in 5 years. So I think rural management professionals can contribute a lot, bringing the systems approach and being true to processes which hand the stakeholding back to those who are most impacted in the situation. All this with an assumption that the rural management program enables its practitioners to engage in participatory processes.
So you have talked about a very interesting issue, that is participatory, because we have been talking in development sector for so long about participatory processes, participatory planning, implementation, and community participation. I think there are a lot of platforms for aspirants or the young generation to learn and contribute these participatory processes through these participatory processes. Since you have been associated with so many CSRs, corporates, NGOs, and government organizations also, so what kind of strategies they adopt, and what are the differences in their strategies? Could you please highlight?
Could you just repeat the question, please?
Sir, as you have said about the participatory planning, participatory processes and implementation of rural management projects, there are so many agencies, who adopt different kind of strategies to work in rural communities. And if, civil society organizations, government agencies, international donor agencies, they have their own mechanism, they have their own implementation plan. So what is the basic difference? What kind of strategies are there?
So like we say, the activity part of the strategy is infinite, but I think the part which actually is required is the context of the stakeholders in every context. And those, putting the initiative back in this, that's the, I would say, the primary opportunity there, design. And organizations, wherever we start from, there's an organization which would focus on childcare, there's another on nutrition, third one on water, fourth one on farming, fisting, whatever. But I think eventually all roads lead to Rome. If we are talking about unlocking the potential of a human being, once you unlock it, with whichever gate you enter, after that, even if you stop, that process will not be stopped. So what one is talking about, what is that trigger which will bring out the potential locally? So we believe that every person and every this thing has a chance to opportunity to take charge of their own lives. There are some inhibiting factors. So if you're a development professional going from any organization in any constraint, and if we look at successes that the country has met in terms of transformation, successes have not been met with activities in terms of X, Y, Z. It has been met through processes. So wherever the process was consistent, you might have intervened with one activity, but the village or the family didn't stop with one activity. They multiplied it and had a spiraling effect. So I don't know if I'm able to register it properly, but whatever the activity, the underlying spirit and the theme of making sure the primary stakeholders' capacity to take charge of their life become. It's something similar to a typical family in India. If while bringing up children, if the father continues to decide for children while they are 5-year-old, 15-year-old, 25-year-old, 35-year-old, and 40-year-old, I think the child might develop a lot and yet stay underdeveloped and needing of father always or the home. What we're talking about is, can we do away with that? Can we unlock the potential? When will you let go so that that person can become self-sustaining? That process is the spirit of context. I mean, if I have to cite a few examples, I think Pradhan is one of the prominent NGOs which has reasonably succeeded in religiously following this. And similarly, so across the country, quite a few initiatives in small and big ways. There used to be something called CDF, Cooperative Development Foundation near Hyderabad, Warangal, actually, to be precise. Their thrift movement was something similar, unlocking and sticking to the principles of democracy and sustainability. If I had to say in other words, I would say parents who are not afraid of their children falling and hurting themselves. And even in our engagement in the communities, I think allowing people to make mistakes and learn from them is a very crucial element. And as organizations, we do find it difficult to do that, but that works. Yeah.
Sir, there is, when we talk about child vulnerability, especially children who are children with disabilities are more dependent, on face-to-face services in terms of health, education, and protection. Uh, so one category of children with disability, and the second category are children because in current situation we can see that a lot of migrant workers have been returning back to their villages, and majority of them are women and children. So a very disturbing event came to my mind when I discussed about the migrant worker, when a 12-year-old migrant girl died while returning to her house in Chhattisgarh. So likewise, there are so many cases. So what kind of safety measures are there for such women and children, and what kind of agencies are there to help these women and children?
So, the helpline, the agency, there is a CWC, Child Welfare Committee in every district. There's a helpline dedicated available. The Women and Child WCD department is there, and then UNICEF and various organizations. But what finally matters is when we come aware, how do we trigger these people? Because if you remember, the debate started with those who are vulnerable.
Yes.
So your vulnerability, your capacity to recall and to respond is not there. So somebody else will have to do it. And I think I would suggest this way, that while we expect people to be doing it on their own, but all of us need to engage more and more in playing a part in this, so that this becomes a daily practice and it becomes a visible activity, accepted norm, rather than becomes an exception. And that's why. So people emulate others. So those who are weak or vulnerable, they're, if any of you know the diffusion of innovation idea. So the early adapters of anything are people who already are in a position of comfort zone. So in this case, so while agencies are there, situations are there, who triggers of seeking out help makes a huge difference. And I think that is where it will be necessary for all of us to keep watching and step out of our comfort zone and respond. And meanwhile, Dr. Ratna, let me just take a pause. I see a question from Dr. Rajendra Singh, which says the question is, industries badly affected, laborers out of job. What will be the effect of all this on child labor involved in village? Now, mostly because laborers are in the village and wages are very less. So actually, I was wondering, what would be the appropriate answer? First, I was looking at a direct answer, and I would have said child labor is reality and happening, and there are laws to prevent, and we should insist. But if you look at Dr. Rajendra Singh, your question, actually, I would say with those people, the adults returning to villages and requiring livelihood, maybe there is a vicarious kind of a benefit that child labor actually will not be required because there is an excess of labor locally available. One of the this thing of child labor in the villages was they came cheap, they came easy, and they were locally available, and the parents were migrant labor elsewhere and could be forced here. So I'm still wondering, I don't know the facts and numbers, but this was a thought that came to me when I saw your question, that maybe it has unforeseen this thing. But what I'm really worried about is what all risks are children facing now because of more adults, being in more tense conditions around them. Adults who have themselves become vulnerable and who are, without an engagement in areas, so I am worried on that count, that we really need to enhance our child safeguard capacities much more than ever before, and that's the context.
I'm also looking at one very interesting question.
Yeah.
Somebody has asked how rural management education could contribute to general and mental well-being of villagers, rural people post-COVID situation. So could you please highlight that, sir?
Yeah. Could you just repeat it slightly loudly? I just
there is a question, sir. How means we are talking about rural management education, skill set. So how rural management education could contribute to to improve general and the mental well-being of rural community post-COVID situations.
So essentially, I would say that on its own, normally there is no God-given gift from a rural management or general management to be available to be kind of engaging. But I think having had formal structural education in terms of being able to plan, in terms of being able to develop processes, in terms of being able to understand problems and articulate, let's say, to help construct a theory of change around. These are contexts in which I think knowledge and management from a rural context capacities would be greatly relevant in these communities, because I think despite its challenges, collectivizing, especially in marginal communities, is one of the surest ways of development. That's starting with collectivizing. So I think one of the biggest opportunities from rural management context is the formation of collectives, and especially if rural management has a reasonable exposure to the contexts of gender and balance and issues of power and empowerment. I think the collectives being seen from a women's perspective and looking at redistribution of power, it could have a very lasting, far-reaching change. It may start with an economic-driven intervention, but the economics will influence the politics also eventually in the long run. So that's where I think the opportunity, the confluence of collectivizing economics and politics is where I think the opportunity for rural development professionals is.
Thank you so much, sir, for responding. When we talk about women and children, because you also highlighted women vulnerabilities as well. So, even before this situation, which we have been facing today, even before the situation was not very satisfying. If we see, the marginalized women, even if we see that the Sustainable Development Goals directly talked about children and women, they are at the top agenda of SDGs. So what kind of challenge do you know after this situation, what kind of challenge will be there in achieving SDGs in terms of women and child development, and how we can contribute to achieving this. We means the rural development managers could contribute in achieving SDGs post-COVID
So,
situation.
I would put the oft-quoted context of what got us here will not get us there. So, which means that our way of doing things has to undergo a drastic surgical change. And the drastic surgical change will be in both what we do and how we do that. And maybe this is where there is an opportunity. Maybe because SDGs, while we've been talking about them, they were preceded by MDGs, Millennium Development Goals. When the MDGs looked like not being achieved, I think that's where we regrouped and evolved SDGs. Now that we're talking about SDGs and we're having a fairly constrained or challenged progression, I think suddenly the current circumstance of working or engaging from remoter contexts has brought in a lot of thinking and knowledge body as to how to engage with people, when you don't have access to them, physical access, when you don't travel those distances. I think in that one little thing, a huge potential has been unlocked in the minds of professionals who engage. And so the speed with which you can reach has multiplied. Previously, we could reach in 12 hours, 24 hours through a plane, train, and whatever, and we thought that was the best way, and engage and be there, and then as long as you can and come back, and then wait for the next time. Suddenly, the circumstance has forced us for almost 3 months now, and God knows how many months ahead, where you have to engage from a remote distance. And most of us are reporting that we found ways of continuing to engage. We have innovated. So when we have innovated, I think the uncomfortable question to ask is we could have always done it and we didn't do it. And that's one way of looking at it. I don't mean as a negativity, but I simply mean that necessity is the mother of inventions, circumstances make the person. So now that having that, so coming back to your question on SDGs, I think the opportunity in terms of leveraging technology is at its highest now. So I think as development professionals, I think we should be looking at our ability to apply technology. So two things will happen: scale and spread will be more, and second is costs will be reduced, and the speed will be again exponentially increased. So these do offer. Now the thing is that we need content, we need solutions which can be riding on this scale and spread and be multiplied over time in a faster sense. I think we are in a much riper situation than ever before for actually accessing scale and speed and technology vis-a-vis the SDGs. I mean, I'm optimist. I'm saying it's a better, the crisis has given an opportunity.
Yeah, obviously so.
It is within striking distance.
So could you think, government system will, there will be more policies and programs focusing on women and children, or there will be any, change in the existing policies or programs for women and children? What do you think? What would be the initiatives government should take,
I think, I mean, it's purely speculation, but I think the thinking will be in terms of looking at more secure and kind of stronger livelihood opportunities for women. And even more than livelihood, I think the short-term measure will be that of providing to survive through the current crisis. I mean, the survival part is immediate. So I think cash transfers and I think short-term requirement 3 to 6. But now short-term, what is short-term is what is really uncertain right now. We thought short-term was 15 days. It's become 1.5, 2 months. It could become 3. But I think in short term, the government is also realizing that they have to cut through all red tapes and directly reach and deliver, resources to people, putting in the hands of people directly. And I think that is a major psychological shift and change. We were talking about all that, it's happening. Once we get used to that happening, bypassing of so many layers. I think the same thing will be followed up with a similar context for looking at long-term solutions, which will be in terms of livelihood and context. And since migration has come out very strongly, I think a lot of localized development initiatives will be taken on a stronger footing now than ever before. So that imbalance in industrial development, imbalance in employment opportunities, value addition and all, we may see a greater emphasis and enhancement on that.
Yeah, true, sir. I think there is a question because when we talk about marginalized children and women, sir, and in each of our policies, we talk about integrated approach. We talk about more social reintegration of marginalized women and children in our society. So at the same time, we have kept this norm of social distancing because of this COVID pandemic. So what do you think? Is there any contradiction? How will it be managed? And how people will cope with this situation? I think you have in your list the last question is related to that. Should I read?
Yep, once again, let me just check that out. Yeah.
It's a question from Amala.
Yeah.
It's about Indian education system is entirely different.
Yeah.
Could you
Copying
see that?
Western, we're looking value of education. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's very
Okay.
important.
So I can read that. Mingling, giving them a. So I think there is no one size fit all and no one uniform solution and something. And it's not that there is Western and there is Indian. I don't know what is Indian. Indian in Bengal is quite different from Indian in Tamil Nadu and Indian in Punjab and context. And I don't know what is West. West can be Europe, within Europe, many countries. All I'm saying is that I think education needs to be meaningful to the person who's being educated. Some of you may have, read or be familiar with, Paulo Freire's work, especially pedagogy of the oppressed. I think the basic principles of learning which he highlighted there, adult principles of adult learning, I think the same are valid even for children. I would take a summary of the entire book as being adults only learn what is important to them. Paraphrase it, that children will learn only what's important to them. They shall learn only by experiencing things themselves. So which means page 3, page 5, memorizing, rote learning will be part. And third is they shall learn from witnessing somebody having already learned it and evidenced. So it cannot be very abstract, vague, distant learning, whether it is Western or Indian or any context. The value shall eventually be derived from, can I earn a livelihood from this education? And if there are choices offered now between a system which is continuing an education without resulting in enabling livelihood, and there are systems available which enable livelihood, people, like it or not, will veer towards livelihood, whether it's Western, Indian, Eastern, Japanese, Chinese, or anything. Whatever system you call it, if a person sees an assurance of a livelihood potential or more secure livelihood potential or de-risking, they will veer towards that. So I don't think the discussion should be whether we make choices as to which education system is appropriate or not. We should be looking at the outcome, and we should be talking and engaging with the primary stakeholders, the children and their parents, on what kind of outcomes they are aspiring for. And I think the spirit of participation says if their outcomes can be brought by the system which they choose, you enable that. Well and good.
Sir,
Position. Yeah, sorry.
yeah. Yesterday I noted a very important issue to discuss with you today because talk about children and I was just listening an interview with the environmental specialist, who just quoted one statement that, even for the global warming and climate change, when we talk about global warming and climate change, the women and girl education are at the topmost, even before the solar energy and green transport. So what is your opinion? So when we talk about livelihood linked education, how it is applicable in context of rural areas in India?
So you're talking about the women and girls, the
Yes.
context?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So, I mean, absolutely believe that an equitable society is very desirable. And for that equitable society, we need to enable the women, the female population, or there needs to be an equitable gender balance. However, I feel much more work in this context needs to be done with the men who hold power. So to make this as a purely focus on the vulnerable and with the vulnerable and ignoring and bypassing those who may be holding power or source of the original problem, we may not really be addressing a lasting solution. So I would highly recommend contexts and strategies which involve all stakeholders in every problem. So if we are looking at SDG goal, and if we are looking at environment sustainability goal, and if we are looking at women and girls as being supported in the context, if it's happening in isolation of the men, I'm afraid it may not be a very sustainable development. Their acceptance, endorsement, and celebration is essential. I don't know if it directly answers what you were asking, but if it is not, you can paraphrase what you're asking and I can attempt again.
No, it's true, sir, because I myself, when I was working with tribal children in Western, means in tribal areas of Rajasthan, there are a lot of issues related to child education. A lot of children, tribal children, will drop out, and when we were trying to mainstream those, children to the formal education, the context which they understand is very different, because they are the local people. They need to, the policies, programs, projects, whatever we brought from top is not in there. They are not able to
Yeah.
adjust with those. So what
I,
is,
yeah, sorry, please go ahead.
yeah. So just your opinion about that, because
No,
we
please
have
go ahead.
very limited time. So,
Can you repeat it, please? Sorry, I missed.
sir, actually, what I mean to say, because within the different categories of children, the tribal children have a different kind of problem with them, because not a problem, but we always form a policy which is a standard for all the children. But when I was working with the CSOs who are working in the tribal areas of Rajasthan, what I found, the policies are not aligned with their own needs, with their culture, with their so.
Yeah.
What kind of opportunities there for young generation to work for those tribal people?
Yeah. So first, I want to quickly respond to last question number 39 from Professor
Yes.
Arokya Raj, Father
Yes.
Arokya Raj, and I just want to reiterate that he may differ from me, but I don't differ from him. When I said about livelihood, not at the cost of character building, certainly not. I mean, livelihood without character is nothing, but having a character but not being able to survive is equally nothing. So I would say how we arrive at capacitating individuals into de-risking their lives. Livelihood is a crucial issue. When you have food in your stomach and you can face the next day, is when you can also start discussing about basic values, principles, and other things. So I would say it's not like one thing at the cost of another or something. So I would say evolution in the process. I think a capacity to act. If we are talking about how does a person start taking charge of their life and act, and how do they take right decision? One is de-risking their basic existence. So existential issues should not be bothering a person, combined with the basic character is a big vague question. That's why I stray away from it, because it sometimes takes very extreme tone. But if character building is basic human values and context, fully there with Professor Arokera, And third context is with both these in an environment where you have a capacity to act, the power to act. So you may live in a democratic system, but you may not be able to participate in a democracy. On the day of voting, you may have to earn a daily wage labor, or you have to do something. That democracy doesn't count much for you. So the entire environment, triangulation of it is what leads further. But I'll pause there on his. I just saw that question last, so I thought I need to share with him that I certainly don't differ from him. Certainly not, and that's not the message I would like to send across. Character building is in fact on top priority at SOS, for instance. I mean, it's a part of my responsibility to turn out good citizens, not just livelihood earning citizens. Coming, Dr. Ratna, to your context, I would say it's not just tribal, non-tribal. Our basic mindset of always looking for uniformity, and singularity, that's where the problem lasts. In solutions, I think Excel sheet has done great disadvantage where you look at all cells, rows, columns as looking similar. So people don't behave like that. And agriculture is not about cloning, that all plants should look alike. It's okay if they look different. That flowers in a garden are plural, multiple, that the garden looks more beautiful. Similarly, I think education or any response to children, including tribal or non-tribal, I think it has to be very localized. Our spirit of democracy and our spirit of participation should allow us to not prejudge and pre-decide for everybody and force that down their neck. It needs to engage and voice with communities. There's no perfect one solution. And nor I do agree that if there are 100 million children, that each child will have a curriculum which is different and which will each child will have a different school. No. But if we have a choice in a school to beat 100 kids into becoming and looking same, without honoring their individual aspirations, I think education would have failed them. If our education system allows each of the 100 to come out and bloom in their own terms and find, their own liking, disliking, tribal, non-tribal, language, poor, rich, whatever, as a system, we need to foster that, foster the spirit of learning and come out. So I wouldn't categorize it as saying it's a tribal versus non-tribal. It is also there among various facets. It's this, the problem is with seeking conformity and uniformity and making the learning process more fearful than engaging and happy. That's where the problem lies.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, last question, because it's already 7 o'clock.
Yes.
So very briefly, although you had already answered the question, but I would again ask you because there are so many questions in mind. So what kind of, if the youth pursue MBA rural management course, if they select this as a career option, so what kind of opportunities there for them to, very briefly, if you could again
So I think I would encourage the flip side. I think what's more important for such a professional is to, so when we say opportunity, it's about responding to advertisement, placements and jobs. Then the questions that come in mind is this nearer my location? Is this near my hometown? And does this pay well? Is the office structure good? Do I have to stay there? That I'm saying put all that aside. Find out what excites you most. Where is it you're willing to put yourself into trouble to learn and learn to be able to contribute meaningfully. Once you do that, then there are organizations and opportunities there everywhere onto that. So I would say the management schools, and I'm appealing to you, Dr. Ratna, that try and turn around the entire placement process. Instead of, and by placement process, I don't mean the companies, I mean the students' mindset. When do they consider themselves successful? Do we recall who got how much salary, average salary, which is, I know, you develop a framework of who got to fulfill what they liked doing in their dream, and which is the kind of work. That is there a person from Jaipur who wants to work in Shillong, or can he be willing to work in Shillong? So when we say opportunities and then we put conditions in, it has to be next to Jaipur, it has to be near my hometown, I must have a Sunday off, preferably an office space and not have to travel, or I don't have to stay in a. So we go about destroying opportunities for ourselves. So I'm saying break open those shackles, create a mindset of where are you needed, where is your kind of competence and skill needed. Would you like to venture and go there? What will it take you to go there? What kind of ability? And then reverse may ask, what kind of knowledge capacity will that opportunity build for me? These two things will, you will find, will suddenly infinitely open up opportunities for people. But if the drive is very selfish, ki mujhko kya milega, what will I get out of this? I think organizations will also tend to interview to people to size up how much work we can get done from them. So it's a different relationship then as an employer-employee. It's not a mission-driven and it's not a cause-driven. So rural management professionals have to make a choice. Do they want to be more management and more professional and less rural and development? Then yes, there is one set of choices. They have to appear for interviews, they have to make bets, and whoever is smarter than whoever in presentation may get ahead. Parallelly, if they follow a passion, if they seek out and if they offer services to develop, they'll find infinite needs are there and they will be taken care of. I'm not saying people have to survive on love and thin air, but job seeking will become more exciting then. If they just break out of their framework, silo, and context.
So, sir, I think should we end this discussion here? Sir, thank you so much for sharing very enriching experience with us. You really, I was so worried before the discussion began, but you have put the whole the whole context, the whole topic in a particular context. Thank you so much for that, sir, and sharing your own journey, professional journey,
Thank
and
you.
a very important message you have given to our professional young aspirants that there are ample opportunities in terms of advocacy, research, training, monitoring, and education. You talked about vocational education also, so there are a lot of opportunities, but the only thing required is the commitment, and thinking out of box. So thank you so much, sir, for being with
Thanks.
us, and we really look forward for the continued discussion with you in the subsequent
Thank you.
webinars.
I really
Thank you.
hope it was worthwhile, whatever little I could share. It came from the heart, and you're welcome anytime to reach out to me. I'm not sure if I said everything that was politically correct.
It was very important, sir. It was very relevant point which you have talked about, and I'm really happy that we could bring up brought some issues into discussions. So we are really very thankful to you, sir.
Thank you, and my apologies if I've disappointed some of you in the process. But thanks for creating this space.
So that's important. I think it is very important for all of us, to discuss all the aspects of the issue. So
Thank you.
thank you so much, sir. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.